Hello and welcome to Plugin Along, a stream dedicated to LOTRO plugins. Last time, we introduced something's flashing on my screen. Sorry about that. Neat. Sorry, last time on Plugin Along, we introduced a real-world problem that a friend of mine has and a quick solution made by plugin developer Thoroughllore. We built on that by first introducing some basic project management with a README and to-do files, using some source control to take snapshots of our work, and we added code to that plugin to make the window movable and resizable from within the game. Today we're going to build on where we ended last week by first cleaning up the code by introducing functions, making it a little bit easier to read and maintain, and then we'll add options so the player can change the opacity of the window from within the game. And finally, we'll see what it takes to localize the plugin. Even though this is only going to have a few things that could benefit from that, it's a good starting point. And if we have time, probably not today, but if we do, we'll also go over the basics of plugin publishing. What does it take to get this out there to the bigger world? So I do have a rough outline of topics I want to cover today, but please feel free to jump in to chat with your thoughts and questions. I don't mind going off script. So let me make sure that, I don't need that configuration window open anymore. Oops, can mic audio be raised slightly? We'll tell you what, let's bring the desktop audio down. Free music is lovely, but you probably don't need to hear that. And is that any better? Or can you bump it up on your end a little bit without getting that free music in your ears? Okay, that's a better balance. Excellent. Sorry about that. I do enjoy the music that we get in Bree-tone here, so that's my bad. Okay, let's first take a look at where we were. What were we doing? What are we doing with our life? So the problem, as presented to me, was an accessibility issue. And my friend, Sandy, said, I wonder if anyone has ideas to help me see my Quest Tracker better. I wish it had a background that I could darken, like the chat box. In some settings, I can see it fine with that darker background, but in others, I can't see it at all. And we've got the Quest Tracker against a very snowy looking background, maybe the Misty Mountains. I have terrible eyes, and I make the font larger, but the background really doesn't help me. Sandy. And yeah, that's a problem, and that's something we can fix with plugins. So that is the problem. And what is she talking about with the in-game chat window? Let's review that as well while we are at it. So over here in the bottom right, let's see, yeah, I'll make that a little bit bigger. We can see this chat window has a bit of a darkened background. This is controlled by the chat window opacity setting. So we can take it all the way down to 0 where there's no background at all. And we can take it all the way up to 100% where the background is fully black. And anywhere in between there, you're gonna see some amount of background and some amount of the game behind it. And we can see those trees coming through right there. So that's the control, and she was hoping there was some way to do that for the quest tracking area as well. What do we have? What are some good quests to throw up there? Excellent. Oldenori and Talisnar. I have a 130 character, but we're just getting into Gondor, Eastern Gondor, and Oldenorian and whatnot, so that's okay. So we can see exactly this problem happening right here, actually. The quest text against that background that is both mixed green and some grays and just changing color, that's a little bit hard to see. So, exactly, Iron Wolf. Yes, those are tough. I have pretty good eyes as well, and so I can make do, or worst case, you can just rotate and throw it up against a background that's a little bit more solid. But what can we do with a plugin? So we introduced the concept of source control last time. I use a program called Fork, but if you are using source control, there's a bunch of different programs out there. And one of the things it lets you do when you take snapshots of where code is to go back to that snapshot. So if I go ahead and check out that initial commit there, we can load it up and see what we started with. And this was the basic Quest Tracker, Opaque Quest Tracker that Thoroler created. Now this solves the problem, more or less, but it does it by hard coding the position of the opaque box in the plugin itself. We can see where it's positioned, the leftmost and topmost, how wide it is, how high it is, and the opacity are all hard coded in the file here. So if I wanted to change the opacity to 100%, say, I'd have to unload the plugin, reload the plugin, and that applies to every character on every server on every account that I have on that machine. Now maybe I share the computer with someone else and they don't want that to affect their account, or maybe I just have different needs for different characters. Maybe if I have a low-level character who's always running in the Shire, it's not nearly the same problem as running around in Mordor. Maybe the color schemes are just different enough. So we wanted to add some customizability from within the game instead of having to modify this file. That is true, Iron Wolf. These are not always straightforward words, although in this case, they all seem to be... am I done with all of them? That's boring. They're all go back to Tolwyn. Well, I don't have a lot of in any other category, do I? Okay, it'll have to do. But yes, there's a lot of Tolwyn going on in that quest tracker. Okay, so that was the basic version. And when we go ahead and look at what we did, we figured out how to move the window in-game. So if we go ahead and load it up, we can now click and drag the window. Let's see, how wide is that? Oh, it might be a little wider than I want. Okay, so yes, we can click and drag the window. When we step forward in time to when we can resize the window, then clicking on an edge of the window, after we unload and reload, clicking on an edge of the window was enough to resize it, while clicking in the middle still let us drag the window around. And then, let's see. And then we had a few ideas in the chat about more things we could do. And that brings us up to the present point. So I'm going to minimize that. And we can see some of those to-do items that we had in conversation at the end of the last stream. So that catches us up to where we were at the end of last stream. We now have a plugin that where its position is hard-coded over here for now, but where you can move it around and you can resize it. But when you unload the plugin and reload the plugin, it forgets where it was. It didn't save its details, and we still don't have a way to control the opacity. So that we're going to conquer both of those in today's stream. I'll just check out chat while I grab a drink here. Iron Wolf in chat asks, are the values for left, top, etc. both 0 to 1? Is the minimum value 0 or 1, and is the maximum value? Yes, in this case, the values for left, top, width, and height are expressed as pixels. And so my monitor is 1920 by 1080 pixels in resolution right now. It supports other resolutions, but that's what I have it set at. And I'm running LOTRO in a windowed mode, so it's taking up slightly less than that. So it's actually about 1900, 1910 by 1000 or so. So the minimum value is 0, 0. That's going to be your upper left, or no width and no height. And your maximum values are going to be whatever the maximum value of your screen normally is, so 1920, 1080. Good catch. Let's go back to Iron Wolf says the default seemed to do it in percentages 0 to 1. That's an excellent catch. Whoa, that's funny. My sublime text was redrawing itself oddly there. So yeah, let's take a look at that. What is happening here, and why is it happening? Excellent. Yes, in this case, the variable left, top, width, and height are being expressed as percentages. The opacity is also being expressed as percentages, and we record that in code with a decimal value, 0 to 1. And the reason that is because there's two ways to go about this, but in general, if you are a plugin developer who wants to support a LOTRO client that gets resized to different screen dimensions, either because you're playing on two different screens, your laptop screen and your desktop screen when you're away from home and when you're at home, or if you have some other reason to be resizing, then if you record it in absolute values, this thing is 20 pixels wide, or if it is 800 pixels across the screen and I want that to be halfway because this is 1600 wide, then when you change screen resolutions, it just sort of sits where it was at the same size as it was instead of changing proportionally with the screen. And so by encoding it this way, what we have here is we understand that we want the left side of this box to be 3/4 of the way across the screen, however big it is, and the width to be 1/4 of the screen, however big it is. So if you take this and double it up on a really huge monitor, you'll still get a box that takes about the same amount of real square inches. Well, that's a deeper conversation. But you'll get a box that scales with the resolution instead of just now it appears half as big as everything else. So that's a reason to do it as percentages. That raises some complications that we're going to see later on when we're saving data into a file, because how decimal values are serialized depends on your culture. In America, a period is used as the rate point, as the separator between the whole number and the fractional number, and in Europe, generally a comma is used as the radix point to separate the whole number and the fractional number. And so we're gonna take a look at that. But for now, yes, absolutely, good catch. Let's see. Hello, Gumpsgang. Yes, Iron Wolf. It makes a lot of sense for the defaults. Yeah, it's this is a fine place to default to, and we're just gonna carry that forward. You can do it in absolute values. You can do it as percentages, as long as you're consistent about it. Either way can be fine. The downside of doing absolute values is if the resolution changes, then things get weird. The upside is it's way easier. All you have to do is make sure the window's on the screen. The user can make resize things if they want to. Percentages is maybe a little bit more user-friendly, adds a little complication. Cool. Some of that complication we can see right here. Every time we use that left value, we have to remember to scale it by the current width of the screen. Every time we use that top value, we have to remember to scale it by the height of that screen. It's fine. It's very easy to do here, but you do have to remember to do it. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, and I'll give you a second to do that while I get another drink of water, let's move on to figuring out how to change the opacity from within the game. And well, yes, stuff moving off of screen and then being hard to get back is a problem. That's actually is something we addressed last time. I'm sure you remember. We added an on-screen function, which ensures when we draw this thing, it is on the screen at least. Maybe it's not in the right position, but it's not off in outside of the bounds of the window where our mouse cursor can't go to grab it. It is possible to use that on pretty much any control, and so it's possible to make sure that anything a plugin draws is always on screen. If not the right size, then at least visible. But however we do it, that is a nice function to call on things once we're ready to present it to the user to make sure the user can see it. Same thing if you have a plugin with little buttons somewhere that you can press to bring up the plugin. Travel Window does this, Reminders does this. That too benefits from an on-screen call at some point, just to make sure that it hasn't been saved off of the edge of the screen. Okay. So, I said first, we should probably reorganize our code a little bit. And I think that's still a good idea. So, a lot of times, a very simple plugin can get away with just top-down, stuff gets executed, we get to the end of the file, that's the end of it. But as we get more complicated, and this isn't quite there yet, but it could be, as plugins get more complicated, it helps to divide pieces of functionality out into functions. And what do functions look like? Well, they look actually just like this, where we take some number of things that you can pass to the function does some stuff, and then the function is done. And so And so if we go ahead and segment this up a little bit, we can maybe make the code a little bit easier to read. So if we make a function, and there are different ways to do this, we could just call it main. It's our main function. What we would like that function to do is a series of steps that sort of represent the execution of our plugin. So what do we do in the file? Well, the first thing we do is we start drawing that window. All right, so draw main window. We know we want to do that, and we know it's going to just look like that, and awesome. And in fact, we could just do that. Now, we're going to go ahead and move these up for a bit. And then drawing the window. Anything related to that main window here, we could go ahead and just move up into that function. Awesome. So we have all of that. We can just go ahead and move it up and indent. And now we have a draw main function window. If you're using an editor that understands the Lua scripting language, you can even collapse functions down so that you don't have to look at that code until you're ready to look at that code. Okay, and then we had that on-screen function that we're not really worried about right now. So how do we know if we broke anything? Well, fortunately, this is a small enough plugin. Let's just find out. Oh, we broke something. Awesome. Now, the trick is to figure out what I broke. Now, there weren't any error messages, so chances are good that the window either didn't get drawn properly or disappeared as soon as it did. Let's find out. Of course. So, as I mentioned before, when the Lua script engine loads the file, it starts reading through the file, and then it executes the first statement that it finds. Oh, Iron Wolf suggests, do I need that window variable to live outside the function? Actually, it automatically does because I didn't declare it as a local variable. It gets implicitly, it's as if I had a window out here for the purposes of the rest of the script. But what I didn't do was actually tell the script to call this function. And a way to do that is just give it a call at the end of it right there. For Andrea says it as well, need to call main. Awesome. So that was, for a brief period, a very simple plugin. It loaded the file, it found nothing to do, and it didn't do it. It was great. So we go ahead and call that main. We can do that anywhere. Some people like to organize things so that the main function, whoops, well, that's funny. So the main function and the call to main are kind of the last thing that happen, and everything else gets declared above it. A lot of times, if you have enough functions, you would even pull some helper functions like on screen out into their own separate file. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. Oops. Let's go ahead and save helper functions. And we'll go ahead and move the on-screen function out of here. It's not really doing anything specific. So what do we need that to look like? We need import cube plugins.opaque quest tracker helper functions. What does that say? It says look in the folder cube plugins underneath plugins. Look for a folder called Opaque Quest Tracker, and finally a file called helperfunctions.lua. And if we've done that right, everything is the same. And hopefully we've made this a little bit easier both to maintain and to change as we go on and to figure out what's going on. Okay, so that's a little bit of reorganization. Hopefully that'll help us keep track of what's going on. And when we don't need it, we can just squish some code down. So as long as that main window is being drawn, we don't need to look at it for right now. Fantastic. So we want, now that the code has been reorganized, we want to go ahead and figure out how to adjust the opacity in game. Now there are a lot of different ways we could kind of imagine. You could imagine maybe making use of the scroll wheel, where you scroll the wheel in one direction, it gets darker and lighter in the other way, or maybe you press Control and click and drag, or something special. These are all possible, but I want it to be pretty straightforward, and I want this window to be as simple as possible. So we're going to take advantage of the options panel. Now this is a place where you can tell LOTRO, hey, draw this thing here for the options. And it's a way to introduce a simple configuration panel to the user. Now for more, let me go ahead. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah. Sorry, I just realized I broke this other one. Let me go ahead and move something back that I accidentally moved out of the way. Let's see, active plugins, turbine, great. Sorry, this is off screen. I moved the turbine files, which contain a few declarations that I don't yet distribute with the deed tracker. I moved them out of the way, and so when deed tracker said, hey, I depend on this thing over here, the game said, well, I don't know what you're talking about, so you can't load. Okay. So for the deed tracker, as an example, if you go to the options panel, there are a bunch of ways to configure how the UI works and ways to tell it about the server. Since there's no plugin way to say what server am I on, or what is the cap level, or things like that, excuse me, you can use the options panel or something similar as a way to get that information from the user. As an example, the reminders plugin, when it first loads on a server that it hasn't been on, it will go ahead and say, hey, where am I? In fact, I love that interface so much, I'm just going to add it in right now. Props to Thurlor for making a great plugin. So the reminders plugin, when you first load it, welcome to reminders version, and then it spits out the version number, and it notices it hasn't been loaded on this server yet. And there's a trick to that we'll talk about when we talk about saving and loading plugin data. So which server are you currently logged in on? You can either manually choose, or you can press the detect button, which is essentially running the /loc command. In fact, we can just do that, /loc. Oh, it doesn't detect if you do it, just if you click. Cool. So if you click detect, it'll look at the LOC output, which we can see here, and it'll see, oh, we're on Evernight, because it says it. You are on EN Evernight. Or you can manually choose from a list if for some reason that didn't work. So there's no built-in Lua way to detect what server you're on, but you can always get the user to tell you. And if they tell you wrong, well, that's kind of on them. Don't do that. Okay, so let's look at the options. You're right. I forgot that the Sublime text window was on there. Thank you so much. Let me just go and redo that because I think it's so cool it deserves to be shown. But I am going to go ahead and delete the file that it generated. Awesome. My apologies. My composition window that shows me where everything is all the way over there on the left. So this is the window that comes. Welcome to Reminders, and it offers you a list of either the current server list, which is something that the plugin developer needs to maintain as new servers like Treebeard and the other one come online, or you can press the detect button. Okay, and Reminders will save that out in a special file. And if that file is there, it knows it's logged on to that server. And if the file is not there, it hasn't logged on to that server. And I just tricked it by deleting that file. So it said, oh, I haven't logged on to this server again. In fact, delete the file again. We can get the same thing. What server are you on? So that is a way that I will often be testing plugins, is by just deleting the files or manipulating them so I can get that fresh state. Okay, so how do we tell LOTRO about the options panel? let me go ahead and figure out where I put my documentation. Awesome. And share it. There we go. So on the LOTRO forums from about 10 years ago, there was a post that sort of opened up this option of when it was first coming out. I haven't seen this released in the official API documentation or semi-official API documentation. So this is a good starting point, and you can always look and see how existing plugins do this as well. We're going to walk through it, but this is kind of where the original documentation for this comes from. And if you don't find it in the API Lua documentation that SSG puts out, neither could I. It's fine, it's still there. You don't have to worry about that. So I'll hide that API documentation for a second since it's not going to be too useful for our purposes anyway. Let's take a look. So first of all, we want some sort of function. So draw options control. And let's make a function that does that. Function draw options control. So what does this look like? Well, the first thing is that we need a control, and we're just going to make a very basic one. Options equals. We're just going to make an empty control. It's not going to have anything to do, but we want to make sure we can see it's there. So let's actually set the background color. Let's see. In fact, I'm going to move a window around so I can see it a little bit easier. Nope. I don't want to see that much of it. Thank you, Windows, for full screening that. Okay, so we have setback color. We just need to pass a color, and it doesn't have to be very fancy. So sometimes I'll just pass like a dark gray. These are values between 0 and 1. And so this is an RGB, red, green, blue color, where 0 is 0 and 1 is 255. So this is not very much color. And here's the magic. There's a variable while you're starting up called plugin. And you can define its get options panel. I will have to spell it correctly for it to work. Get options panel to be a function which returns a control. And that's the magic right there. There's a variable that we don't know about, but it exists, and we can control one of its functions so that when LOTRO queries that function, it can say, oh, well, it gave me back a control. I'll put that control smack dab here. Oh, I closed it. What was I doing? Into the panel. So let's go ahead and load the Opaque Quest Tracker. We can see the options button lights up because there's something there. And when we click on it, we can see there's a gray box. This is a control that's kind of a default size. It's been changed to the color, and we know it's the one that we just did because if we change those colors, let's make it obnoxiously red with 100% red. We'll go to the options. Yeah, that was definitely the box that we drew. Let's stop it being that color. That is bad on the eyes. Okay, there we go. Back to being gray. So that's the essence of this. This is the control. And hey, plugin, when you're asked about a control for the options panel, use this. But we can do whatever we want here. We don't just change the color. In fact, let's just separate that out. We've defined the control, we've given it here, and now we can do all the things we want to do. For Andres says that if you put something that's not valid there, it can crash your game client when you load the plugin. It is true that I every once in a while will get the game client to crash when I do something wrong. This is one of the reasons why SSG, though they do have plugins, and obviously I'm here on the LOTRO Twitch stream, but it's not really officially supported because you can cause yourself problems with a plugin that are not part of the basic program. Like the basic program, I do not find crashes on me. But if I put something invalid in the wrong place, I can get it to crash. So that creates a support headache for SSG. And so while they definitely have the ability for plugins, that's one of their first steps if you're having client issues is turn off all your plugins and now can you reproduce the problem? Because every once in a while a badly behaved plugin can cause a problem. So we're going to make sure we don't do that because that will be a little embarrassing if I crash this on stream, funny though it would be. So we're going to try to type correctly. We'll see. Okay, so what do we have? We have a control. That's a good start. So let's add maybe a scroll bar. I love scroll bars. They drag, and inherently they drag from 0 to 100, which is great because we want an opacity between 0 and 100%. So let's use a scroll bar for that. All right, so I don't mind with the options being different, but with a different color, but let's go ahead and make it a different size as well while we're at it. So, gonna have to spell it correctly though. And that's just a decent size. Set height. In fact, why don't we set size? I don't need to do that separately. I don't know. What will that look like? It's gonna be a rectangle twice as wide as it is tall. Ah, great. That's plenty of room to work with. Okay. How about a label first to explain to the user what's going on. So add a label for the scroll bar. So let's just maybe call it opacity label because that's what it's trying to do. It's labeling the opacity scroll bar. And that is located in the UI namespace. So opacity label. Remember that you have to call set, first time I've done it, this file, set parent on a control in order for it to be a part of the, in order for it to be drawn. Basically each control draws itself and then it tells any of its children to draw. And so if not parented into something that will draw, you don't show up on screen. So let's go ahead and set it to be the options because that's what's going to get drawn. And set a few things. So we want to set the size. I don't know. Let's just make it most of the width of the window for right now and see if that's good. And normal sized fonts usually take about 15 to 20 pixels tall. Let's just throw 25 in there as it'll be a big enough for our purposes. Oh, someone says I have a typo. I would never do such a thing. Thank you very much. That'll be great. Iron Wolf asks, can you set these with percentages? When you pass, in fact, this is a point where the API documentation might be helpful. So when you go to a control and you say, set width, set height, set size, these are taking widths in pixels. And I'm going to say 95% confident that you can only do pixels here. So if you want them to be percentages of the screen width or the screen height, you would have to do something there. Now, the problem is let me hide that. So this window can be resized, and I don't know if there's a way to ask how big it is. There might be. I haven't played around with that. You can register for a resize notification, so you could probably figure out how big this window is, or at least how big of the space you have to draw in. It's never really been a thing that I've been too worried about because if we put something there and they can't see it, they can make it bigger, and if they can see it, then we're done. So I haven't played around with that too much, but I think there is a way to hook into whether this is resizing or not. At the very least, the control itself, we can see is getting bigger and smaller, and so we could hook into the resize event of the control and change other things based off of that. Neat. Okay, so we have a basic size for our opacity label. Do we need anything else? We should move it around so it's not in the upper left. So opacity. Oh, should we? Let's just set a text and see where it is. Opacity label, set text. And then what do we want in here? Let's start out with just like the word opacity and see how that goes. So unload, reload, it's there. Okay, awesome. Like I said, it's jammed up in the upper left there because its position defaults to 0, 0, 0 left and 0 down. 0 from the left and 0 from the top, really. So that's a starting point. We'll circle back around on that and figure out if there's a better place for it. But what's the other thing we need? We need a scroll bar because we want to be able to drag something and have that affect the opacity. Okay. Well, what do scroll bars look like? Well, in the documentation, we can see that, well, that's not helpful. There is a scroll bar in turbine.ui. Is there also one that's in LOTRO? There is one in the LOTRO namespace. These tend to be have a little bit more of the look and feel of things you'll find in LOTRO. So that might be a good starting point. So let's go ahead and say local, and again, naming things is hard, but how about opacity scroll bar? Because that's what we're trying to do. We want to set that opacity. So we saw that it's in the LOTRO namespace. And remember that the first thing we want to do is set that parent to options. There we go. What the? Sorry, someone just made my character pull down. Wow, over there, they've got long range. Okay. That was strange. I mean, I don't, she's not doing very much, but still. Okay, so we have, we've set the parent. We probably also want to set it to be about as wide as that window. Whoops. So let's go ahead and set the size to be 200 wide. And scroll bars just don't take up a lot of space. So let's start with 10 tall and see what that does. Now, what's one of the things we can do here? We can set, that's not it. We can set the orientation of the scroll bar. Now, it might default to horizontal, I don't know. But just in case, we might want to go ahead and override that. And if nothing else, tell future us that we really mean the orientation to be, and then where would this be? Orientation. So this is a turbine.ui.orientation dot horizontal. Neat. What other things? We probably want to move its position. We probably want to do something about its value, but let's see if we're actually drawing anything yet. Nope. I'll bet you scroll bar is capital B, isn't it? Yes, it is. Excellent. So Lua is a case-sensitive language, and so anywhere where there's a capital B in a type name like that, we have to match it, and so I'm just going to update the variable here so I remember a little bit better. So let's go ahead and hide that documentation. So it failed to load because of that syntax error, but now we've got it back. Excellent. Okay, so in the options here, neat. We have a scroll bar that we can click and drag. Doesn't do anything yet, but it's there. And we have a label. Both of those things are great. How about we move them down a little bit just to make it look a little prettier? So what if we move the opacity label, set that position over a little bit and down a little bit? So maybe 10 and 10. And what if we go ahead and do the same thing with the opacity scroll bar, but over a little bit and down even more? So we know the height of that text box. It's 25 down on top of the 10, so we know it's going to be at least a 35. So let's go ahead and set it at 40 and see how that looks. Now the text box is probably larger than we need it to be. Well, that didn't do it. I need to actually include both parameters to that function, or it's only going to process the first one. Awesome. Okay, yeah, we can see that's maybe a little bit further down than we need right now. So what I'll just adjust it to 30, and we can see they're nicely together. You can see that the one is meant to be associated with the other. If they're too far apart, a user might be like, well, are they together or not? Because there's a lot of space there. Okay, awesome. Well, we're partway there. We have an options panel, and on that options panel, we have a scroll bar that we can use to represent how opaque the window is. Now we just need to hook some stuff up. We might want to start with knowing when the scroll bar value has changed. Well, how do we do that? Let's go back to that documentation. In the scroll bar, we can take a look at the events section and see if we can find something. Probably something about the value. Awesome, value changed. Event fired when the value has changed. Nicely straightforward. So we can set up our event handler to look just like this. So opacity scroll bar. Oh, we're going to assign the value changed to be a function of our declaration. Whoa. Sorry, there was an auto completion there, and I don't think I want to use it. It's a little bit more than I want right now. So the standard event handler function looks like this, where the sender, in this case it's going to be the opacity scroll bar, and whatever arguments it's giving. We can be clever and use that, or we can just go straight to the scroll bar itself since we know what's sending this. Neat. What do we do with this value now that we have it? Well, the most obvious thing would be to change the background of this window. Now we have access to window. As we talked about earlier, it's being treated like a global variable because this was not defined as local. So we can just grab that window and set the back color to something. Well, what was that doing? Let's take a look. Set back color. Okay. Now, if I were being clever, well, if I were being nice to myself, change window opacity. I might do something like this because we're going to want to change that window a lot, and this is a long line to write. So we can see we're taking a variable called opacity. Now that might get us into trouble. There's also a global variable named opacity. Usually locals will override, but just in case, we're going to go ahead and use new opacity just to call out that this is the new value that we're setting. And we want an RGB, red, green, blue value of 0 because we're looking for a black color that is some level of opacity. Awesome. Well, at this point, we can go ahead and just call change window opacity of opacity. There we go. And use that same function down here as well. So instead of doing the whole set back color, we can call that same function to be something. So what do we have? Actually, we can use sender and just call get value on it. Because we know that getting the value is something scroll bars can do. So we could do that with the sender. We could do that with the opacity scroll bar as well. We can go either way. So get the value from here, and so we know that this is going to be between 0 and 100 inclusive. So it can be any of those values, and we need to supply something between 0 and 1 inclusive. So local value equals that. And then what do we do with that? Value divided by 100. Looks like it would get us the right thing. That is funny, Little Redhead. Little Redhead has proudly proclaimed that the current streamer has died 0 times. I tell you, if I die during a plugin episode, that is going to be really funny. I don't think I could die even falling off this roof. I don't think it's that far. Thank you, Prancing Pony, for being too short. Okay, so um, we have a value from the scroll bar. It's not scaled correctly, so we can rescale it on the fly as we pass it into the change window opacity. And then let's see. Did I maybe do too many things at once, or is that going to work? All right. Well, everything loads. So if I grab that bar, oh, nice. So we can see if it's all the way to the left, then the opacity is 0 and the box is see-through like we want. If it's all the way to the right, the opacity is 1, 100%. It is black and completely not see-through. And anywhere in between, so it's going to act a lot like that chat slider, actually. Let's see, can we see that? Options, chat opacity. Oh, well, I closed my other window. Awesome. Now, we didn't have this fancy we didn't have this fancy box with the fancy little diamond. We could get more complicated like that. But we've done pretty much what we wanted to here. We have a slider scroll bar that is controlling things. But I'm kind of envious of this live update of the number, because here we're just kind of guessing. Maybe that's 50%. So I think I'd like to add that in. Sorry, I'm just glancing at chat. It's amusing. Okay, so we have, we want to go ahead and set the value of the opacity label to maybe include the current opacity. That sounds cool. How do we do that? So there is a couple things we can do. We could, let's make a function for that. Function set opacity label. New opacity. So what we really want to do is set the opacity label. Oh, that's not going to work because that's a local value, and I don't feel like fixing that. We'll just do it in here. Now you can declare functions in other functions and go down that rabbit hole, but it's not a problem. So we can do one of two things. We can do opacity label set text, and we can use basic string concatenation, where we say opacity : value. And we know that value is between 0 and 100, so that's a nice, friendly way to do it. And we can go ahead and end it with a % sign. That's a thing we can do. In fact, if we check it out, let's go ahead and close that. For Andreas recommends binding the plugin manager on the toolbar. Well, that's an interesting idea. What would that look like? That would be shortcut 9/plugins manager. Well, that's a great idea. Thank you for Andreas. I think that is a nice way to do it. So what I just did there, in case that was too fast, is you can do /shortcut and then the number for the position. The first bar is 1 through 12, and then your additional 5 bars are 13 through 24, 25 through 36, and so on. So /shortcut space position space the text that you want that to be. And you can see down there the alias is /plugin space manager. Let's see. There's also a suggestion to look in the options. I'm always up for finding things. Toolbar. Oh, interesting. You know, I completely forgot that this was the thing you do. LOTRO is so customizable, and I forget all the things you can do with it. That is fascinating. So what does system do? Well, I never use that. You can put the plugin. Oh, wow. Oh, that's wild. You can put the wallet in there. I gotta see that. Huh. I I was behind my Sublime Text one. Sorry. So wallet. Oh, traits are already there. Okay, that is neat, and I completely forgot about that. Thank you for derailing me. Group stage info. What? Oh, neat. Okay, I'm going to stop getting distracted with that. So this is alphabetical, it looks like. So whatever language you're looking at, you'll find it that way. Oh, it says Lua. Oh, you know, I never noticed that. There's just red text there, and it's really yeah, it's just red text that says Lua on top of something or another. Huh. Fascinating. All right, thanks so much. That is cool. That's probably a more sustainable option than binding a shortcut to my bar, but neat. So if you didn't realize, you can change these. And I think I knew it at some point, but like I said, there's so many ways to customize your experience. I forgot that was an option. That's cool. Okay, where was I? Let's pop a text window back up here. Oh, we were gonna go ahead and see what happens. So drag this bar and we can see what's happening right there. Opacity is being, the text area is being changed as the window is being changed. So 100%, 0%, 50%. Yep, Iron Wolf is pointing out in chat that when we first load the options, the scroll bar is just defaulting to its default value of 0. But we can see the plugins, the opaque window behind the quest tracker, it's obviously not 0, it's partially opaque. And the value here, the opacity, that's not filled in either. That only gets filled in after we start moving things. So it would be a much better experience if this bar and the value here started out to match whatever value we have over there. So what does that look like? We have the ability to do the same thing over here. Oh, I was going to show you the other thing that will maybe help us a little bit more later on. So we have this way with concatenation. We also, have opacity label set to text. We also have the string format function, string format. And this is useful for reasons that we'll get to in just a minute. So what does string format do? I'm sorry, I put that in the wrong place. String format takes, first of all, the string, the format string. In this case, it might be opacity. And we know we want a number there, a digit number. And we know we want the percent. Now, the string format is special. It's using percent to flag special characters, escape characters. And so if you want an actual percent, you need to put 2 of them in a row to really mean it. No, it's not this one of these other things. It's really a percent. And the other thing you do is pass things that get filled in here. So in this case, we want to pass in value. Now, does that look different? Absolutely not. It's going to be exactly the same. Why do we do it? Well, we're going to talk about this later, but the key thing is localization. Other languages might want to put this differently, or they might want to put it in a different place. This is a simple example, but in more complicated examples, you might want to give other languages a little bit more control of where the number happens or what the number looks like. They might want to not use the percent sign. They might want to have it be in a different place. They might want, well, who knows? I mean, that's the whole point. I don't necessarily know what the French or the German language would want to see in this position. So the string format, by getting this all in one place, means that we can later offer a localizer the option to swap out this whole thing instead of just maybe this part, or both of these parts, but separate, and they have to have a value between them. So we're going to go ahead and concatenation, and we'll call this, string format. Good for localization. Awesome. So if we have this method, we can go ahead and we can do the same thing out here, actually. We can set the text using this format string, and instead of just saying opacity, we can use the default value here, opacity. This is that global value up here, which is defaulting to 0.5. And you know what? We can do that on the scroll bar in one go. Now, in our documentation, we saw that there's a get value option. I bet there's a set value. Set value, there we go. So it takes a value. It's pretty straightforward. So, whoops. If we go ahead and do the same thing, opacity scroll bar, set value, we can also pass it the opacity. Now, we have a bit of a problem here, of course, because the global opacity is in decimal form, 0.5 instead of 50%, and we want to show 50%. So we're going to have to remember to scale that up here, just like we are scaling it down when we are changing the window opacity. All right, well, let's see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and unload and reload and hide that documentation. Awesome, we have a starting value, 50%. The bar looks like it's in the middle, and if we start dragging up and down, we can see that looks very nice and contiguous. There were no jumps because the bar didn't match the internal value. Awesome. That is a controllable value right there. Well, now that we have an options window, we could probably call that a good point and make a commit into source control and save that. So while I grab a drink of water and check chat, is that a koala bear? Nice. Comes through very well. Okay, let me go ahead and pull up the source control window. We can see it thinks two things have changed. One, we've added, there's a little green plus here, a helper functions file. The only thing in there is the on-screen function. Awesome. And we did a couple of things. Now, actually, we did two things. We reorganized some stuff and we added the opacity. That was bad of me. If I were being a little bit more careful, I would do both of those as separate commits into source control. One reorganization and one adding new functionality. Do I care? How much do I care? I care a little bit. So, if I go ahead and pull out the draw options control call and the draw options control function, then that puts us back to where we were just drawing the main window and using the helper functions. Awesome. So that puts us back to the reorganized code to use functions point of the code. So commit, take a snapshot, and then we can come back in. In fact, I can just undo those changes. And now we can look at our to-do file and see what did we just do. All right, adjust the opacity of the window in game. Perfect. That's exactly what we did. Opacity of window can be changed. Neat. So, opacity window can be changed. That's a great commit message. I do have stuff on top of stuff. Well, that's a problem. Apologies. I was modifying the to-do file, removing the adjust the opacity. I was modifying the README to change the opacity, but we're actually going to look at those changes in the source control right here. So we can see in the README file, opacity has been changed. We can see in the to-do file, we're done with that change. And finally, in the Opaque Quest Tracker, the draw options control code, and only that, is being captured in this snapshot. So that's a thing that can be very helpful, is just separate things out. The reorganization of the code stands by itself, and now we have the options stuff. So when we want to know what did we do for the options control, it's just these changes right here. We made a new options control. In fact, let me move that. We made a new options control. We set the back color and the size. We added a label. We added a scroll bar. That's the only thing we did in order to make that happen. Neat. No unknown changes in there. Commit. And now we have a snapshot capturing that. So the first snapshot was the reorganization, the addition of the helper functions with the little plus here showing it's a new file, the changes here, all of those changes. Sometimes it can be easier side by side, sometimes it's not, but we can see we moved a lot of stuff around, and so it feels like there's a lot of changes, even though it wasn't very much. And then finally, the opacity changes. Okay, so that's just a peek behind the system at the source control. All right, can people see? We can see. Awesome. So in the to-do file, what's the next thing? Well, kind of the last thing is saving the window's size and position and the opacity, saving all of these things. Because right now, if I move the window, I resize the window, I unload and reload, we're right back to where we were. Right here, 50% opacity, same width, same height, same left, same top. And that's because in the code, right here, these are set in stone, as it were. They're hard-coded in the file. And we want to be able to save those out to a file and load them, both because that's convenient for the user and also because we want to learn how to do that. So let's take a look. Just glancing at some notes here while I take a drink. Oh, you know what? While we were working with the options panel, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, which is the window, even when it's in the right place, if you go to click on one of these quest rings and miss, you're going to end up possibly moving this around. Or if you just are trying to move your window, you might accidentally end up resizing the quest opaque instead. The Opaque Quest Tracker instead. And so it might be convenient to have a concept of the window being locked, where it ignores the mouse completely, and unlocked where it responds to the mouse. So you can move it around, position it to the right size and location, but then you can lock it, and then it doesn't react to the mouse at all. So let's pause a moment. I think that's going to be pretty straightforward for us to do, and that'll really improve this because it's in a place where people are going to be clicking a lot because there are quests there. And I don't know about you, but I right-click on these rings and remove all or set a quest guide focus a lot. Interesting. I haven't played with the find others on quest very often. Let's see. Ooh. Huh. Interesting. That's cool. Sorry, I just realized that's behind here. So I clicked on here and find others on quest, and I got this variation on the fellowing window, which I can select one of my quests that I'm on, and I'm just not used to. Oh, there's a quest grouping down there. Things I keep learning about the game. Neat. Okay. So let's go back to the code a moment. There we go. And so how do we stop this from happening? Well, the easiest way is just to tell the window to stop responding to the mouse. But we want to control that a little bit, because if it never responds to the mouse, you can't move the window at all. So maybe we can have something in the options window. So let's add a new thing. So I forgot to comment this. Add a scroll bar to control opacity. And finally, add a checkbox to lock the window. Okay, so a checkbox. What's a checkbox? Now, you've almost certainly seen these in-game, but there is a turbine.ui.lotro checkbox. A standard Lord of the Rings checkbox, and it has a bunch of things you can do with it. But specifically, you can set some text on it. You can click the box to make it checked or not checked, and you can know when the user has done that. Okay, let's go ahead and hide that for a minute. Well, I guess we'll leave it up while we're writing this. Okay, so we need words for locking. So locked checkbox, sure. And let's double check the spelling of that. That is a capital B box, neat. And what's the first thing we want to do? We want to remember to set the parent, because otherwise it won't be drawn on the screen. And we're going to set it to options. And then, well, it's got to have some text on it. So let's see what that would look like. Lockbox, I don't know, set text. Excellent. Oh, it looks like checkbox. Cows in game. How is there a cow up here? That's fascinating. I wonder if someone I know is playing tricks. Fantastic. Well, hello, person. Thank you for the cow. Well, whoever you are, he wants me to move. Nay. Brotherman Buttenberg can just deal with me being up on his building. Okay, so we have the lock checkbox. We saw that it's set text. And what are we going to put in here? It just, lock the window in place, right? We don't need to talk about the mouse or whatever. And I don't know, let's see what that looks like, right? Let me go ahead and hide the documentation. And we forgot to change it where it is. Let's pull that down, right? Let's set checkbox set position. We've been indenting things over 10 pixels just so it looks like it's not on the edge. And the previous one was 30 pixels down. Let's try 70 pixels down. Give it a little space from the rest of it. Okay, it looks like the default width is not as wide as we want. So locked checkbox, set size. And we can do the same thing, just make it as big as the window practically, and 25 tall. We're not too worried about that. Awesome. We have a checkbox. It is got that little nice LOTRO checkbox look to it. If we really wanted to, we could put maybe a space or two before the text here. Oh, that's funny. Well, maybe we can't do that. To move the text away from the checkbox a little bit, but that's okay. We'll start with that. Although it makes me curious. If I were to open up the collections panel, ooh, let's see. Okay, there we go. Those are right justified checkboxes. Ooh, I'm jealous. Okay, we'll come back to that. Yeah, Iron Wolf, I'm just noticing how close that text is, and it's really just sort of the default look and feel of the checkbox. Like I said, it's probably fixable. So if we were to go ahead and make the size even bigger to accommodate that extra text there we go. So it's possible by adding an explicit, maybe that's too much, by going ahead and adding an explicit space in there to separate it out a little bit. It's a question of taste. For a little options window like this, easy enough to do for one item. Poor Andreas might be claiming responsibility for that cow. Well, thank you for visiting. Good job getting up here. It's a big jump. Okay, so we have a checkbox. It doesn't do anything yet. Like, it's not locking it because we haven't told it to do anything. So that would be the next step. So we have, let's see. We can probably figure out when the status is changed with an event handler. So I'm going to collapse down methods. Oh, hey, checked changed. Event fires when the checked state changes. Awesome. Apparently this is both a label and a checkbox. Oh, no, that's just from being a checkbox. Cool. Okay, check change. Okay, we can see it uses the standard event handler right here. So locked checkbox dot checked changed equals function sander args and end. Well, cool. What do we want to do in there? Well, Windows have an ability from controls. Let's see, mouse. Oh. Cool. There's a function that every control has called set mouse visible and the corresponding get mouse visible. And this is a flag that controls whether or not when the mouse is clicked, whether or moved on the control at all, but whether that goes to this control or not. And if it doesn't go to this one, it might go to something underneath it. And this is exactly what we want. We want to go ahead and set the mouse to not be visible. So when the box is checked. So what does that look like? We know we want to do window set mouse visible to something. So we can set local is locked equal to the, we can either do sender or we can do locked checkbox since we are in the same place. We can see the locked checkbox variable is checked. So if it is checked, then it is locked. Because, let me hide that, we can see that's how we've worded it here. Checking it means locking it. Okay. And we know that if it's locked, we want the mouse visible to be false. So we can say mouse visible equals not is locked. So if is locked is true, mouse visible is false. If is locked is false, mouse visible is true. Basic Boolean negation. Whoops. Mouse visible. So go ahead and set mouse visible to be not the state of the checkbox. All right, well, let's try that out. So we load it back in. We can see that it does not say it's locked. We can move this around. We can lock it. And then when we click and drag on here, we can see that it acts just like we're clicking and dragging on the screen itself. It's panning the camera around. We can click and drag on the edge and we can't resize it. So if we unlock it, we can now move it around. If we lock it, when we click and drag on that window, same thing. It just moves the camera angle around again. Unlock, move it up here underneath the radar, and lock, clicking and dragging just moves the camera. Awesome, that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted a way to tell the window to not intercept any mouse commands because we're done with it. It's in the right spot. Perfect. So easy. Iron Wolf is backtracking to ask about the size for the checkbox. It's actually an interesting question. And one of the things I do when I'm trying to figure out what's going on with the UI layout is I'll just change the background, just like we did for the options itself, to figure out what's going on with that. How much space is that taking? So we can see the locked checkbox. We can do, set back color. And we know we want a turbine UI.color. There are some predefined colors. You can just use one of them. You don't have to go and define your own RGB colors. Okay, so we can see this is the current width. Now, why is it different than options? Well, that's a really interesting question. And it boils down to what we saw here, where the size of the options is rescaled, horizontally at least, when the window changes width like this. Now, if I wanted to know more about that, I might go to the documentation and go to control and say, hey, is there an event that tells me when the size has been changed? There is an event that tells me when the size has been changed. Let's hook into that and see what happens. So options, size changed, equals, and there's going to be an event handler. So we're going to get the same sender args. And you know what? Let's just be lazy and turbine.shell.writeLine. We're going to send this to the standard chat channel. And what do we want? We want, let's get that. Local width height equals options get size. Awesome. So, and in fact, if we want to do a little formatting, we could say local text equals string.format width. We want a string value. Oh, it's a number value probably. And height, we want another number value. And we're going to form that with width and height, and we'll go ahead and spit that out. Yeah, I know, right? I'm going off script here. I don't know if it's going to work for Andreas, but we'll see. Okay, so we can see in the standard chat window, and in fact, speaking of opacities, let me go ahead and chat, make that a little bit more opaque so that we can see those values. Okay. So we can see the checkbox label is this size, regardless of how wide or narrow we make the window. And so the initial width we asked for was 250 right here. And we can see that the checkbox is probably that size plus 10 because we know it's 250 wide and it's 10 over. So it should be from 10 to 260. So if we get that right there, we can see, the control is now 260 wide. Now the plugin manager remembers how big it is. So if I unload that and close it and bring it up and load it, what do we get here? We get a width, let's see. We get a width of 167, but as we make it bigger, it makes room for all the things underneath it. Now this is an important thing. The control itself is resizing, and we can know it's resizing, but by default, nothing underneath it changes. Now, we can fix that, or I don't know about fix, but we can react to that. Instead of spitting out this information here, let's go ahead and just comment that out for a minute. We can instead move this function after these other controls have been defined. And let's just worry about the checkbox. That's what we were talking about. So we're going to set the size. Well, actually, we still want that width. So set width. We want the width minus 10. So we want it to be as wide as the window, the control, minus 10, because that's how far it is indented. In fact, we could say locked checkbox get left. Same thing, because we know that's 10. What happens with that? Let's find out. We can see that the checkbox has, oh, that's going even under my window here. We can see the checkbox has a background of red, so we can tell where it is in the layout. And we can see that it is staying the same size as the window, minus 10, when the window is changing. We could do the exact same thing for the other controls we wanted. Oh, that's an interesting point. If we wanted to make this look a little bit better, Iron Wolf suggests let's have a margin for both. In fact, local margin equals checkbox get left. And we can just do margin times 2. Let's see what happens there. Go ahead and unload. Go ahead and reload. Come back in. Oh, that looks so pretty. Look at that border there is on both sides. And we can even see that because this is an evolution of a label, labels will handle wrapping of text to some degree, and it's still doing that here. So if we were able to get even smaller, okay, we can see the wrapping is taking place there. Now what it won't do is it won't stretch vertically. So if you run off the end of your up to down, oh well. But the label will wrap text horizontally. So that's pretty cool. Excellent. Yes, get left times 2. Now, in this case, because I'm using the left as the margin, I like to go ahead and highlight that's what I'm doing, call it another local variable, no big deal, and then do the local variable times 2. But if I were being a little lazy, or if this get left was a little bit more obviously named, I could absolutely do without that variable right there. Yes. Cool. So that red is starting to get on my nerves. Now for a lot of predefined colors, there's a dark variant. So we can just do dark red instead of red. Super easy. Okay. Where were we? Okay, so that was defining a size changed function on the options control itself, the thing that we handed to LOTRO, so that when LOTRO automatically resizes this control to fit the window, because it does, it issues a set width on this when the width changes. We can go ahead and pass that set width down into children controls, just like this. Sweet, perfect. So we can lock the window, we can unlock the window. We still have the problem that the window is resetting everything when we load it. So let's go into saving our settings. Iron Wolf says, sorry for the sidetrack. I find reactive resizing Windows very satisfying. I absolutely agree, Iron Wolf. Resizing is a really nice way to accommodate the fact that there's only so much space in the LOTRO window, even with large resolutions, and sometimes you just want to have multiple things up and around. As you can see, as I keep struggling to have all of my windows up for you right now. So yes, when you can support resizing, and in fact, resizing in the D tracker is on my to-do list. It's more complicated because, of course, the more controls you have, the more controls you have to go through and say, you're wider, and you're wider, and you're wider. Oh, now you're narrower, now you're narrower, now you're narrower. So a thing that you can do is, instead of looking out for that size change, you can wait for the resize to finish. Okay, they're done. Now redraw 200 different controls instead of trying to do them live as the resize is happening. So there's a couple different ways to handle that. Okay, let's see. Well, other than that red background, I think we're pretty much done. So let's go ahead and fix that. Set background color. We're gonna go ahead and delete that. Double check that everything looks good. Awesome. Well, we have finished another thing. Oops, that's preemptive. So in our to-do, we wanted to, we knew that there was a known bug that the window was absorbing mouse clicks, which means you can't click things behind it. Awesome, we just fixed that. Done, no more known bugs. And in the README, we can say bug fix. window can be locked so it ignores the mouse. Perfect. So in our source control, we can go ahead and take a snapshot of where we are. We can see we have a bug fix. I'll go ahead and use that as the commit message as well. And what do we have here? Oh, we have a little comment. That's fine. We added a checkbox to lock the window. Perfect. And we have that size change. That's not really related, so we'll hold off on taking that snapshot. Okay, and then react to options window resizing. And that's can be its own little snapshot. Okay. Iron Wolf was asking, let me just read that real fast. The check. So the first thing I would do if I wanted to look into, that spacing between the checkbox and the label is just to see, is there anything in the checkbox control that allows us to control that? Maybe there's a thing in there. So that would be the first thing, is just maybe this is a solved problem. So go down to the sets. That's too bad. I don't see. There's a set text alignment. I would play with that. And worst case, yes, it is possible to go in and change behavior of existing things. Or it's possible to make your own combination of a little box thing and a label to always have that separation. But the really a thing that you can do, and this is a really fast thing, is lock checkbox. Oh, let's see. Locked checkbox. Set text. Well, set text with space equals function. And we're going to take the text. And for that, you would say locked checkbox set text space concatenate text. And then from then on, as long as you use the set text with space function, it should be able to take care of that for you. Now, watch as I missed something and this doesn't work, but we'll see. Ah, no. What did I do? Oh, the wrapped lines were right next to the box. You're right. Okay. Well, not to get too sidetracked. But apparently, I didn't write that quite right. But that is the kind of thing that I would look into is, you're absolutely right, Iron Wolf. The wrapped lines are still next to the checkbox. No, I don't really like the wrapped lines, but that is absolutely true. So if we remove that space right here, we can see here the wrapped spaces are at least have the right thing. So that's a fascinating question. I'm going to put that in my notes for think about later. How to get the text further away from the checkbox. Okay. Notes. Or questions. Awesome. Okay, we'll move on. Cat Barbarian says, hey, before love the stream, well, thank you very much. Was just wondering if it would be possible to make a plugin which would hide the lightning effect, which comes from arcane rune stones. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a way that a plugin would have the ability to change the UI like that. Now, the UI is very customizable. If we go into the options, into both graphics and advanced graphics, it's very possible there's something in here that if you tweak it would also affect how that animation looks. I don't know that specific one, but as an example, and this is a very well-known one, the drunk effect that you get in-game from consuming alcohol, or the Eye of Sauron effect that you get on Treebeard in the other one. I'm just kidding. It's Shadowfax. I like joking. I like the triggered one. So the Eye of Sauron effect that you get there, those are both influenced by the post-processing effect that you get under advanced graphics. And if you turn that off, you do lose some other things, but you also no longer see the drunk blurry effect or the Eye of Sauron blur effect. Let's see. For Andreas found the problem. Oh my goodness, you're right. Yes, that was a syntax error, a Lua problem where I did not code the function correctly. Excellent. But even calling self would not have solved that wrapping problem where the margin is not set correctly. Chaotic Barbarian, the other one. Okay, so that's a thing I would look at is first do some searches. Maybe someone else has found the right setting if there is one to tone that down. If there's an accessibility concern, if it gives you headaches or something, it never hurts to bring that to SSG's attention. Send off a customer support email saying, "Hey, is there an option? And if they're not, could you pretty please make one? Because I love playing Runekeepers, but this is causing me XYZ problem." So that being said, there's a lot of stuff in here. I assume there's nothing called lightning. Well, there's specular lightning. What's that? Oh, lighting. Lightning. Yeah, there's nothing specifically called lightning, just like there's nothing specifically called drunk. But there are a lot of options. So give that a try at least and do some searching. But like I said, it never hurts to reach out and say, hey, this would be a really cool option to put into advanced graphics. But that is beyond what plugins can do, beyond putting an opaque box on the screen like we have here. Like if your runestone always came out here and an opaque box helped reduce that effect, I guess that could be a thing. Or maybe the lightning comes down from the sky, but I don't think that's really what you're looking for. And that's kind of the limit when it comes to interacting with the user interface like that, as far as I know. Now, I will be the first to admit I am not an expert on LOTRO Lua plugins. I have my little areas of focus where I'm pretty good at it, but I am confident there are a lot of parts of LOTRO plugins that I am not aware of. So just because I don't know how to do it does not mean it can't be done. Okay. Cool. Yeah, good luck with that Chaotic Barbarian. I know personally I was super glad that the post-processing effects does turn off the Eye of Sauron effect, because I cannot stare at that for more than a few seconds before it starts to make my head go wobbly. So yeah, it's really important to me that that things like that are available to make the game a little bit more accessible, because there's a lot of cool things involved in the game, and if it's just that one little thing that makes causes problems, just like the ability to read quest text against busy backgrounds, like, yeah, let's do what we can. Okay, back to options, saving options. I think we can do this. Sweet. Okay, so let's get some stuff on the screen. So we had saving stuff. Let's do it. So how do we save stuff? Why do we save stuff? We save stuff because we don't want to reset our plugins every single time. Whoops, I've just resized a window here. Okay. So, let's see. There are two functions that LOTRO provides in the turbine section of the namespace, and this is not on my screen. Aha. This is the plugin data section, turbine.plugin data. There are two functions given here. There's load and save. Oh, thank you, Little Red Head, for putting a link to a lot of very cool plugins. So the load and the save functions both look pretty similar. In fact, let me make it a little bit bigger here. Okay, and what do we see here? We see plugin data.load. It takes three things: a data scope, a key, and a handler. What's going on here? Well, the first thing is a scope, and we can see a type called data scope defined here. And that tells us there's three ways we can save a file. We can save it for the account wide, we can save it server wide, or just for this character on this server on this account. So account for everything on the account, just this server on this account, or this character on the server on this account. Very importantly, you cannot save things for other accounts on your machine. The plugin only has access to your account's plugin data. So if the redhead came over here and was using my computer, her account would, all of her plugin data would be stored in a different directory structure and would not be available to my plugin when I'm running it as my character. But we do have a lot of flexibility, and saving it per character or per server gives us a lot of flexibility in what we do. In this case, we just want to save it for character. We'll just say each character gets to position this window for its own use, and that'll work great for our purposes. Cool. What's the second thing? The key. Oops. The load. Key. This is the name of the file that you're saving to or loading from. And it's pretty much your choice what you use here, but I really recommend using your plugin name as part of that file name so that it's really obvious for people looking at it that it's Opaque Quest Tracker settings. Oh, I think I know that those are the settings for Opaque Quest Tracker. If you just call it settings, that's going to be confusing and potentially a problem if another plugin also decides to write its information to settings. What's this last one? This last one is a handler. Now, a plugin goes through a three-phase life cycle. It is either loading, or it is running, or it is being unloaded. While a plugin is loading or unloading, it's allowed to load and save files however much it wants, and it immediately gets the results, or at least as soon as LOTRO can load the file. If you are running, you're no longer loading and you're not yet unloading, then these functions do not return immediately. And in fact, it usually takes my computer about 15 seconds for those functions to return. And that's intentional. It's meant so that your plugin can load and save stuff while the game is playing, while your player is running around, your character is running around, and it doesn't interfere with things. So if you're a combat logger and you're logging a lot of information, you say, write that to file, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to freeze while you're fighting. It happens in the background. But while your plugin is loading and unloading, the assumption is kind of that you are either in a safe spot and you're manually saying load, or you're just logging in which case it doesn't matter. You're not in combat, you're fine. And so the loads and the saves happen immediately. So you will see we're going to ignore that for our purposes because it's not necessary, but it is required if you're trying to save and load after your plugin is fully loaded. Now, that's a lot of information. What does it look like in practice? Let's take a look. First of all, we need something to save. And for that, we need a table, a Lua table. So it might look like this. Now, what are we going to put in there? Well, it might help, just like with here, to have some default values. And so we might go ahead and say default settings equals. What's going to go in there? Now, it can be helpful, especially if your plugin has multiple sections, like a main window and a little activation button or multiple windows. It can be helpful to divide these up into sections. So we're going to go ahead and have a section called Opaque Win, and that'll be its own table. Oops. And finally, we start having values. So load tables are very flexible. You can have numbers, but you can also have text as the key. So we might want to go ahead and have left equals 0.75. And we might want to go ahead and have top, equals 0.5. Oh, 3.5 thing. Where'd that bracket come from? We might want to have width. And as you can see, I'm just setting them to the previous hard-coded values there. And height equals 0.35, and opacity. Now, you don't have to do all caps like this. It's just a convention that I have personally. The important thing is just to be consistent. I wouldn't do some uppercase and some lowercase. This would, opacity, that would just be very weird to me. But as long as they're all up, all lowercase, camel case, whatever works for you. Oh, and the final one, which is a brand new feature that we might want to track, is whether or not the window is locked. And we'll go ahead and default to not, because by default we want them to be able to move around and position it. Excellent. Iron Wolf has called it out. Left top width, height, opacity, and locked. Perfect. So we know the starting settings if the user's never logged in before, or really the character, and we have a place to put those. All right. What else? Well, we want early on to go ahead and load settings, if there are any settings to load. There might not be. And we can go ahead and, you know what, we don't need that anymore. We can go ahead and say function load settings, end. And what goes in here? So we want to do something with that function that we see, turbine.plugin-data.load. And so what do we have? Well, first of all, we have that scope that we talked about. So data scope. So turbine.datascope. That's got to be a dot. We just want it for the character. Okay. And then we want the file name itself. Now, like I said, it doesn't really matter what it is, but it's helpful to have a convention. So if we were to say settings file name equals Opaque Quest Tracker settings. That works. So we can go ahead and write that function right there. Hopefully, typo, I would never do such a thing. Thank you. That'll work much better. So we have turbine, datascope, character, and we have the file name that we're trying to load from. And what do we do with that? Well, we can go ahead and say the saved settings, or loaded settings equals. Oh, that's getting a bit long. Let's find out how Lua feels about new lines in the middle of a statement. Okay, so we are saying load. We're going to go ahead and assign it to this thing. Now, optimally, we want to make sure that we loaded something good before using it, because sometimes there's nothing there, or sometimes maybe there's a problem with the file. So the first thing we want to do is make sure if the thing we loaded is a table, because that's what we're expecting. In fact, let's go ahead and look at what we're expecting, or something like it. So what we're expecting is plugin data files always look something like this. A return statement, and this is just valid Lua code. So it's returning a table, and in this case, it's just that table that we were looking at. This was some experimentation I was doing earlier. And the values in no particular order whatsoever. And in this case, I was working with the German client, so the radix point is a comma instead of a period. Okay, so we're looking for a Lua table. That's what we're looking for. Now there's a special keyword called type that we can use to say, is the type a table? And if it is, then we can do something. So if the type is a table, then we should use those things. Awesome. What happens if it's not a table? Well, it might not be a table, like I said, if the file's not there at all. This is your first time coming in, or the file is just bad for some reason. Maybe someone went in and was typing random things. Whatever. In that case, we have, we have that default settings that we can use instead. So we can even comment this. Did we load something good? And then yes, use what we loaded. And then otherwise, no. Start with the default values Okay. So this is how we can load stuff from the file, but that doesn't do very good if we haven't saved anything to a file. All that does is let us load a file that will never be there. So the next thing we want to do is save the file. Now, the basic way to do that, especially for a plugin like this that only has a couple of settings, is to ask LOTRO to tell us when the plugin is being unloaded, and at that point, go ahead and save things. That prevents us from trying to save every time a setting changes. Well, how do we do that? Well, when in doubt, add another function. Register for unload. Yeah, that's fine. Naming things is hard. So we have the register for unload function. And what are we going to do in here? We're going to say, and again, this is a special thing that you can do, is the turbine.plugin.unload. You can go ahead and assign that to a callback function. And what are we doing there? Well, that's where we go ahead and save our settings. In fact, we can go ahead and have a function. Save settings. And cool, save settings. So it might be nice to test to make sure that this is all working before we write any more code. So let's go ahead and just say shell.writeLine. And we'll go ahead and say we are in a save settings. Just something basic that we know that everything is hooked up properly. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and hide that. We'll go ahead and unload. We'll go ahead and load. Okay, nothing bad so far. So if we go ahead and unload, we can see the output text, we are in save settings. Perfect. That's great. So we know that we were able to ask to be told when the plugin was being unloaded. We are now in the unloading state, which means we can read and write files with immediate results instead of waiting for that 15 seconds to elapse. And awesome. So what does it look like to save stuff? Let's take a look. It's actually pretty straightforward. So we know that there was my API documentation went away. So we know there was this save method. It's going to look very similar. So we have the turbine.plugin.data.save. What does it do? What does it take? It takes data scope, just like before. Awesome. Well, whenever we start using something multiple times, I tend to like to put it into a variable. So settings data scope equals that. That way we don't have a mismatch. It's always embarrassing to be looking in the wrong file or in the wrong scope. So much easier to go ahead and simply do that. We need a key. The key to store the data under, well, that's the file name. This is going to get a little long too, isn't it? We need data, the stuff that we want to save. Awesome. This is the thing that was missing before, but we want to save our settings, so save the settings. And finally, the completion event handler, which again, we can pass, but this is going to complete immediately because we are either in the loading or unloading state of the plugin lifecycle. So it's going to happen immediately. We don't have to do it. Awesome. Anything else we want to do? Well, not for this. Although sometimes it's nice to go ahead and print out a little thing to the console when you've loaded and unloaded. We'll circle back to that in a moment. So if we load this, if we unload this, has anything happened? Well, that's a good question. Let's go into plugin data, the current account that I'm playing around in, Evernight. My current character is Tidlos, and we have something called Opaque Quest Tracker. Oh my goodness, you can't see that window. That's wild. Let me just go ahead and open that up. Okay, So can we see the hover text? We cannot. Okay. I have to remember what we're seeing here. Okay, so this is in my plugin data, my account, my server, my character, and it's called Opaque Quest Tracker settings. Now, how do we know for sure that that was just written out? We don't. Let's go ahead and save nothing there. And then back in the game, we're going to go ahead and reload the file and save the file. And when we switch back, we can see this has just been written out, so it's fresh data. Awesome. So if we move the window up here, and if we change the opacity, and we unload, can we see anything about that? Opacity. Uh-oh, we haven't hooked this up. We have settings, but we're not using them yet. All right, let's make that happen. So anywhere where we're using some of these hard-coded values now, we need to go ahead and replace that with using the values in settings. Otherwise, this is just not going to go very far. So first of all, let's just get rid of that line. We don't need that anymore. Left, top, width, height, and opacity, they're gone. So when we're creating the window is a place we're going to need this. Let's see. Do we need load? We do not. Do we need settings? No. Awesome. So when we're creating that main window, and in fact, draw main window. That's weird. Create main window. Okay, so when we're creating that main window, we want to go ahead and use that settings. Now, arrays in Lua, there's a couple different ways you can use them. You can use them with this quoting of the key of the data in the table, or in the case of a string like this, you can just use that string directly. And so it's kind of your choice of which you do, and we're going to do that right here. So settings.opaque win.left, you can see here. That would be very similar to settings bracket, quote, opaque win, etc. It's just a question of what your taste is. Okay, so we've replaced that there. What about width? Same thing. In fact, I'm going to use copy paste here because a lot of this is going to be very similar. Width and height. Okay. The opacity, same thing. Opacity. Okay, what else? I'm going to grab a drink of water while I look to see if I've missed anything. The lock status. We never set the mouse visible in the options control. We set it here. When that lockbox is checked, we set that mouse visible. But we're going to want to do that when we create the window as well, because if someone's already set up their window and has already locked it in position, we want to go ahead and respect that too. So let's go ahead and set the mouse visible. Uh-oh. Well, it's going to be not the settings dot opaque win dot, what did we call that? Locked? Locked. Okay, so if locked is true, mouse visible should be false. If locked is false, mouse visible should be true. Neat. Okay. So, what else? When we are in mouse move, we should probably go ahead and save the state of the window. So, if the window is down, if the mouse is down, great. We've just finished moving or resizing the window, so we want to go ahead and update the saved values. So we want settings.opaque, opaque win.left equals, well, we want to do that same scaling thing here. If we just did window get left, we would have a number 100, 200, 800, 1,000, whatever, but we're really looking for a percentage of the window over. Because remember, we're saving that off not as absolute coordinates, but a percentage. Okay. Well, we have the screen width, but we only have it when the plugin was first loaded. And so if the screen width has changed since then, that wouldn't be right. So we do want to go ahead and get that again. We'll just have local versions of the screen width and the screen height. Now, it might be possible to register a change event for the window changing size so that we only need to do that once instead of every time we're moving this. But the expectation is that this window is going to be moved, repositioned, locked, and forgotten about. So I don't think we need to worry about that performance too much, but that's a great thing to put in the to-do. Only get screen size when it changes, not during every move/resize. Cool. But for now, this will be fine. So we can do that scaling factor, screen width, where the left is how far over it is divided by the screen width for that percentage of how far over it is. And we can do the same thing for the others. The top is going to be window get top, whoops, and screen height is how we're scaling that. And then settings, oops, the width is going to be window get width. And again, that's being scaled as well, in this case by the screen width. And finally, settings.opacewin.height. And we're going to scale that by the screen height as well. Awesome. So whenever the window is moved or resized, we're going to go ahead and save that in the settings structure, which is now being written out to file whenever the plugin is unloaded. For Andreas says it runs after the move finished. In this case, we are resizing live or moving live as the mouse drags. So we're changing the position. Let me go ahead and load it. Oh, I can't load it. I've messed something up. All right, when it's loaded. Because we're moving it live, we're reacting to each mouse move event instead of having someone move the mouse cursor and then when they're done dragging, then we move the window. So it makes for a more responsive user interface, but it does mean we're reacting to 10 or 15 of those move events per second. Now, fortunately, asking the LOTRO how big the monitor, or really the screen is, the window for the game, it's not a very expensive operation, but it's one less thing that we could be doing. Yes, Iron Wolf is correct, exactly. It's not really every pixel, but it is about 10 to 15 times per second. If you're dragging it really slowly, you can see the pixels popping by. And yes, absolutely, we're not writing it out to console, we're just updating some values in memory. And in this case, they're just numbers, so it's the biggest part of the equation is that division. And we could separate that out. We could have them be integers in memory and then just do the division once when we were writing it out to file also. There are definitely options. Like I said, efficiencies can be gained, and in a more complicated user interface, I'd be more concerned about that. Okay, so what did, there's a space there. So I had declared the array incorrectly. I declared it with a space, and we're gonna wanna make sure that's not infecting my save file. And because there was a space there, it made it so my access was invalid. It's not the only problem though. Excellent. So we haven't finished replacing all of those hard-coded variables yet, and so we're getting syntax errors because they're missing. Awesome. Okay, so we had, let's see, we had just finished the mouse move additions. So when we're setting the options control, we want to go ahead and take advantage of these settings as well. So the opacity that we're referencing here, that's really going to be settings.opacewin.opacity. Nope. There we go. Now, in the settings, it is still stored as that decimal value. We can see here the opacity of 50% was stored as 0.5. So we're going to go ahead and still scale it up because it's still in that same decimal format. All right, what do we have? When the lock checkbox is set up, we should probably go ahead and locked checkbox. Now, according to the documentation, checkboxes have a set something. Set checked. Excellent, they have a set checked. Set checked. Now, what's that value going to be? Well, it's going to be the state of the locked value. So settings, opaque when locked. Oh, there's some chat. Interesting. Oh, excellent, thank you. Iron Wolf was saying there was a bug in an earlier iteration of the game where they were writing settings to disk while you were moving stuff around, and so that could cause too many extra saves. So knowing, when to save things is very important in software engineering. All right, thank you for pointing that out. We do have another call to opacity here, where we set the initial value of that scroll bar. We're going to do the same scrolling up that we did there. I wonder if there's any... That's not going to be helpful. I was going to search for the word opacity, but it turns out I've used that a lot in the Opaque Quest Tracker. Oh well. That's okay. When we try to load the plugin and it can't find that variable, we will know. Okay, so we went ahead and set the initial checked status of the lockbox to locked here in settings, and then we probably want to save that off when the status changes too. So settings.opaque when.locked equals is locked. We can do that right there, in fact. So we got the value of the checkbox. We'll go ahead and save it off in settings. What else? Well, when we are changing the scroll bar, we might want to go ahead and save that off. Are we already doing that? We have the value. We're not saving that off. That'd be great to do. So local scaled opacity equals, since we need that more than once, and then settings, opaque when opacity equals scaled opacity. And then we also want to go ahead and pass scaled opacity on in to changing that. My goodness, that was a bunch of changes. What else? I'll go ahead and remove that for a little bit. Well, let's find out. Well, it loaded. That's good. So if I go ahead and move the window up here, and I unload it, and I reload it, it's in the same place. That's awesome. If I go ahead and make it taller, unload it and reload it, awesome, still in the same place. And if we go ahead and in the options, if we go ahead and change the opacity, unload it and reload it, we can see the opacity saved off. Right, we'll make that a little bit taller. Oh. I would do, but I'm having trouble clicking on it because there's another control invisibly on top of it. There we go. That'll happen sometimes because each one of these quest things is a control, the chat window is a control, all sorts of controls. Okay, so we can see that the window's position and size and opacity are being saved. What about the lock status? If I click that, I can click and drag the window around where the box is, and we can see the locked is there. Unload, reload. In the options, we can see it's still locked, and we can see in practice it's still locked. That's really awesome. So what do we see from that? We see that if we have some sort of a variable, in this case it's a global variable, where we can track the settings, and we update it each time those settings change, and then we save them out when it's time to end and load them back in when we start up, then we can save our settings between runs of the plugin, and that's how we get sensible plugin behavior, where you set it up once and it does the same as you have set it up each time you load it up. So that's cool. Although this opacity is a little much. We're gonna dial that back a little bit. Maybe unlock it. There we go. Okay. So that's a pretty reasonable place. What does this look like in the save file? Well, we've already seen a sneak peek of it, but this is the save file. We can see a Lua table, and that table has one key, opaque win, and the value of that is another table, and that table has these 6 keys: left, opacity, height, locked, top, and width. And you can see they're not in any particular order. And this is true in general. When you serialize, when you write out a table to text like this, the order is not guaranteed. It's non-deterministic. In fact, if I were to unload the plugin, we can see that it just got written out in a completely different order. This time it got written out with locked height, opacity, top, left, instead of left, opacity, height, locked, top, width. That's not even backwards, it's just different. What does that mean for us? Nothing, don't worry about it, it's fine. It means that if you wanted to, you could come in and manually move things around, top, and then, or maybe left and top, width and height, opacity and locked. You could do this, and it would be fine. The plugin would not have a problem. But when you unload it again, that order is not going to persist. It's just going to come out however. And this is fine. It's just a Lua thing. Don't worry about it. If someone sends you a save file and they're not the order you're expecting, don't expect an order, really. That's the problem. If you have your own data files that you're loading up for the plugin, for instance, in the dTracker plugin, dTracker, we have a data file. Let's look at the regions data file. We have a Lua table, and we've set it up in a specific order, and that's fine. But if we were to read it in and then write it back out, it would not come out in this order. That's just the way it is. Actually, it might, because these are numbers instead of text, but I don't think so. It probably wouldn't. So this is the file. And we've reached a great breaking point in what we're working on. So we can come in to our to-do, and we can go ahead and mark that as done. So window size, position, opacity, and lock status are saved and loaded. Awesome. Let's bring up our source control, where we can go ahead and take a snapshot of what we've worked on. Awesome. And we can see what happened to make that change. We can see that we replaced or got rid of the hard-coded values. We added in the default settings, the settings. We added in a function to load the settings, a function to save the settings, and a function to know when the plugin is unloading, so that we can use that as a surrogate for knowing when we should save our settings. I renamed a function. Don't worry about that. Then we can come in and we can see we're using those global settings that will be read and saved and loaded instead of hard-coded values. We can see that each of these, we can see we added in that setting mouse visible because we'd forgotten about that. We can see when when the window is moving, we're saving off those values. And we can see we're using that opacity from settings. We're using these values. We're setting these values, and so on. So that's all the stuff that we did to swap in a global structure that is read out to file and read from file, written out to file, instead of just some hard-coded values. Love it. Let's take a snapshot. Okay, so It is 11 minutes after the hour. I was really interested into getting into localization, but I think that might be a bigger task to bite off than we have time for right now, since we're already after the hour. So, if there are any final questions or comments in chat on what we've talked about today, yes. Oh, Little Redhead has pointed out, at Life Beyond the Shire, you can find blog posts that are accompanying each of these sessions that we're doing here at Plugin Along. They're kind of truncated versions. They're basically the notes I'm working on, and then of course when we go off on these fun little diversions during the live stream, those aren't necessarily captured there. But the essence of what we're doing is there. We had some screenshots and some basic code examples, so you can follow along with that if that's more your jam and not watching through a video like this. Also, they go up on the Life Beyond the Shire YouTube page as well. So if for some reason Twitch isn't your jam for rewatching videos, you can find them there as well. Excellent. Little Redhead is going wild with the links. Thank you very much. Okay, so things I want to talk about but have run out of time for today. Localizing the text. That is, we have a plugin here with text here, the word opacity, locking the window in place. Maybe we might have a little startup message that says we've loaded or we've unloaded, things like that. How do we make those respect the client language? Currently, there are officially French and German clients and an unofficial Russian client. How do we make sure that our plugin is presenting the user interface in a way that the user is going to be able to make use of, to not cause them problems? Let's see. Something I think would be really neat is position this thing once and then say, yes, that's the new starting point, instead of this sort of default position we have over here. Because if you're a person who maybe always has your quest text over on the left, your quest tracker, you don't want to have to do that for every character. I think it'd be really cool to have a little button in the options window here that just says, make this the default. That would be cool. Let's see. So yes, all sorts of fun things to talk about. And one thing I definitely want to talk about before we get too much further is how to publish a plugin, how to actually get it out there on LOTROinterface.com, how to tell people about it on the LOTRO forums. And so I think before we do too much more here, I think we'll go ahead and bump localized text into that. Start up and shut down, or really load and unload messages. So we want to go ahead and say, yes, we've loaded, and yes, we've unloaded. Those are nice polite things for a plugin to do, because if for some reason your opacity was set to 0 when this window loaded, you would not have any way to know that the plugin was loaded, other than a message that goes out to standard saying, we've loaded. So we'll add those, we'll localize the text, and then ship it. And then we'll go ahead and ship this. We'll go ahead and actually package it up into a zip file, put it up on LOTROinterface.com, and go through the steps of getting it out so anyone can make use of it. Because I think this is a neat little accessibility tool, super easy, super simple, and for anyone else who has issues reading their quest tracker, they can throw it out, put it in place, lock it, and forget about it. Okay, just checking chat there. I haven't seen any other questions or comments pop up. So, sorry, just reviewing that to-do list, making sure there was nothing else. So, join us next time. We'll go ahead and add in some quick load and unload messages. We'll localize text. We'll look at what it takes to ship it, and then it'll be awesome. It'll be out there. Anyone can download it. Anyone can use it. Ideally, that will only take next time. If it bleeds into the time after that, that's okay. And then the first Tuesday of August, I am on vacation. So have a great August until I get back into it. Okay, well, just checking chat. No final questions. Awesome. Okay. Well, then that's all we're going to cover today. Thanks for joining me on this exploration of LOTRO plugins. I hope to see you next week, and until then, keep plugging along. All right, bye-bye now.